Okay, let's dive right into an incredibly complex and, frankly, highly volatile situation unfolding right now in Katsina State, Nigeria. What we're looking at is a deeply fragile peace deal that's currently hanging by a single thread. In this explainer, we're focusing on the Jibia local government area. It's a frontline zone that's historically been completely devastated by violent banditry, rampant kidnappings, and fatal attacks. Today, we're going to unravel how a community attempts the seemingly impossible, negotiating with its own tormentors, and what exactly happens when that delicate trust completely shatters. To understand how things arrived at the absolute brink of collapse, we first need to listen to the words of those at the very center of the conflict. One of the bandit leaders involved put it perfectly, warning that when we fail to make a decision when the problem starts, it'll be difficult to stop it when it escalates. It's a chilling point, right? A small, localized issue that was ignored by authorities back then has just metastasized over the years into this regional nightmare that's now incredibly difficult to contain. And you can see the terrifying scale of that escalation when you look at how things have changed on the ground. Just a few years ago, local Fulani herders in Jibia traditionally carried simple wooden cattle sticks just to guide and manage their livestock. Fast forward to today, that reality has morphed into heavily armed factions. We are talking about individuals allegedly amassing arsenals of up to 1,000 AK-47s hidden deep out in the forests. It went from this rural, agricultural lifestyle straight to a highly militarized zone of survival and retaliation. So, let's look at Section 1, the roots of the conflict. Because, this violence certainly didn't happen overnight. It was more like a powder keg fueled by a really toxic combination of factors. At the base level, you've got deep-rooted poverty and long-standing bitter disputes over land between local farmers and herders. But the true match that lit the fuse, at least according to the armed factions, was unchecked vigilante justice. Early on, vigilante groups were allegedly executing people without any official trial or legal recourse. And since the authorities failed to step in and restore order, a lot of young men felt their literally only option was to flee into the forests, arm themselves, and seek revenge just to survive. Which brings us to Section 2, the fragile peace deal. Right at the center of this unprecedented experiment is a man named Abdul Lungai. Historically, this guy was known as a ruthless kingpin who strictly controlled the Jibia territory. He exploited locals, sure, but he also violently blocked rival gangs from entering his turf. But then, in a massive pivot, he stepped up to become a key enforcer of a fragile 2025 peace agreement. To the absolute shock of many, this deeply feared leader essentially transitioned into a localized protector, tasked with holding the line for peace in the region. It was a high-stakes, incredibly ambitious bargain struck between the two sides. Just look at the sheer balance of expectations here. On one side, the bandits promised to completely stop the attacks, cease all kidnappings, release their victims, and block rival gangs. In exchange for that, the government made some massive promises to fix the root causes of the region's poverty. They promised to build Western and Islamic schools, construct hospitals and dispensaries, create dedicated grazing lands and dams, drill 12 water boreholes, and release imprisoned Fulani people. It was a comprehensive, highly optimistic roadmap to lasting peace. Moving on to Section 3, 3 different realities. So as time goes on, this peace deal totally fractures depending on who you talk to. First, we have Abdul Ngai's perspective. From his point of view, his faction has flawlessly upheld their end of the bargain. He claims they stopped the atrocities, released the hostages, and have actually gone over a year without initiating a single attack. But he's deeply, deeply frustrated. He says the government has entirely failed to deliver on its end. Not a single school built, not a single prisoner released. He feels like he's keeping the peace entirely alone. And honestly, a frustrated armed man is an incredibly dangerous variable. To really understand this gap in trust, let's look at the promised water infrastructure. The government promised 12 water boreholes to help the community manage their herds and survive the harsh dry seasons. But Lungai points out that only 3 have actually been installed. 9 are just completely missing. Now, to heavily armed factions waiting out in the forests, that doesn't look like your standard bureaucratic delay. To them, it feels like a deliberate, broken promise. But then we have the second reality, which belongs to the government. Local officials push back on Lungai's claims, asserting that they are indeed making progress, but that building dams and boreholes simply takes time. Their argument is basically that massive infrastructure can't just magically appear overnight and has to be rolled out gradually. Furthermore, they claim that any ongoing violence isn't actually coming from Lungai's men, but rather from rogue splinter factions crossing the border from places like Niger, groups who never even signed the peace deal in the first place. And then there's the third reality, and it is absolutely devastating. For the local Hausa villagers living in Jibia, this supposed peace is a complete illusion. Despite the agreement on paper, they report being terrorized, murdered, and robbed on a daily basis. Imagine being so terrified that you literally cannot even go out to cultivate your own farm. And when they beg authorities for help, they are incredibly told to just let it go to protect the fragile peace deal. They are left entirely defenseless. To ground this nightmare in hard data, the villagers meticulously logged the ongoing atrocities. They recorded that exactly 171 sheep and goats, alongside 89 cows, were stolen in a single 8-day period in late March. Think about what that actually means for a second. When your entire community's livelihood depends on agriculture, losing over 250 animals in a week isn't just a property crime. It's the total, systemic destruction of your ability to survive. Now let's go to Section 4, the deadly March clash. All of this totally shattered trust built up to an absolute tragedy. Let's track the timeline here. On the morning of March 17th in Kadobi, a routine intelligence report rapidly deteriorated into absolute chaos. At 7:17 a.m., reports came in of 3 armed bandits on motorcycles entering the district. By 7:30, the local vigilante commander arrived, saw no immediate threat, and, respecting the peace deal, explicitly ordered his men to retreat. But at 7:40 a.m., barely 10 minutes after he left the scene, unauthorized gunshots erupted in the bush. What actually happened in those missing 10 minutes? Well, it depends entirely on who you ask. It is a stark contradiction. The vigilante commander blames a tragic lack of discipline, claiming his younger ranks flagrantly disobeyed direct orders to stand down. But on the flip side, Longai asserts this was a premeditated hit. He claims the vigilantes intentionally ambushed his boys, robbed them of 300,000 naira, and initiated a deadly shootout, leaving his faction no choice but to fire back in self-defense. The horrifying result of this miscommunication, indiscipline, and complete lack of trust was the death of 18 people. In the ensuing firefight, 13 vigilantes and 2 local civilians were killed, along with 3 of Langai's men. It was an absolute bloodbath. In the span of just a few minutes, over a year of tentative, painstaking peace was completely and utterly shattered. Which brings us to our final section, Section 5, the brink of collapse. Following that clash, the clock is quite literally ticking. Langai has issued a terrifying final ultimatum to the villagers of Kadobi. Because the vigilantes confiscated the weapons from his dead men, he's given the village just a few days to return the stolen arms and the corpses of his 3 boys. If they do not comply, he has explicitly vowed to resume full hostilities. He stated ominously that he doesn't know what he might do, but they will see that he is incredibly serious. And this leaves Jibia in a terrifying paradox. Longai insists he still wants peace. He claims he punishes his own boys when they step out of line, and says he even pays out of pocket for stolen cattle to keep the peace alive. But his ultimatum reveals the grim reality of the situation. Peace is currently being maintained at the literal barrel of a gun. Stability is entirely dependent on the word, the mood, and the patience of a heavily armed kingpin who currently feels deeply betrayed. Ultimately, when trust is fundamentally shattered, when government promises remain unfulfilled on all sides, and when vulnerable communities are forced to negotiate their own survival with the very factions that terrorize them, how can a region ever break free from the grip of terror? Is negotiating with armed groups a genuine pathway to lasting stability, or is it merely a brief pause in an endless, devastating cycle of violence? It's a really heavy question, and one the people of Katsina are currently being forced to answer with their lives.